Let me ask you about the abortion question, which you've explained, the hypothetical nature of it, and also your answer on the spread of nuclear weapons. You said you were against proliferation, but then you said you seem to be okay with South Korea or Japan maybe getting one.
It's totally misquoted.
Well, people are so confused.
I know they're confused, and they shouldn't be, because all they have to do is watch. And I spoke with Anderson Cooper, and I spoke to Chris, I spoke to all of them, and I spoke to the New York Times, and I thought it was a very good piece in the New York Times. Look, nuclear is a horror show. I would be probably the last to even think about using it. People say, you promised never, ever to use it. You can't do a thing like that. You have to have cards on the table. But nuclear is a horror show. Just like I said, I don't want to go into Iraq, and I said that a long time ago. I wasn't the wall hawk. There were a lot of other people. Nuclear is a disaster. With that being said, we are taking care, and if you look into NATO as an example, we are funding and taking care disproportionately of the costs of many countries, many countries that are taking us for a ride. We have to do something with NATO. When it comes to nuclear, you're going to have to ask yourself, at what point and at what cost do we continue to protect Japan and Germany and many other countries? Now, they're not paying for this protection in anywhere near what it's costing us. We owe $19 trillion. At what point do they get involved and they say, we have to pay more money for this kind of protection? Now, at some point, they may have to protect themselves. Do I like that? Not particularly. But we cannot afford it as a country. We owe $19 trillion, going to $21 trillion because of the horrible omnibus budget,
right,
which was a horror show. We cannot continue to do this.
When people looked at your answer on abortion, on proliferation, they got the sense you were just winging it on foreign policy issues.
So.
Have you been studying up?
I have.
You met with your foreign policy team in your
Yes.
hotel in Washington. What did you ask them?
More than anything else, I discussed nuclear. To me, the single biggest problem that this world has, and we'll knock out ISIS fast and we'll do a lot of things, but the single biggest problem that the world has is nuclear.
In what way do you mean that's the big?
I think if somebody gets nuclear weapons, that is a disaster.
What worries you the most about that?
I think that probably worries me the most.
Which country, though, of all the ones?
I think it could be many people. It's not even countries. It's splinter groups. It's people.
Did they say anything to you that you have been saying and said, you know, you probably shouldn't say that
Not at all. In fact, many of them, and I'll give you a full list of the people that were there, and the list is being added on, and we have many people that are top people that want to come on board. Many of them were surprised at my knowledge, and they were surprised at the feel that I had for it. I have a feel. I have a
Explain that feel.
I'll tell you what the feel is. The feel is, I was asked on a certain competitor show of yours about NATO. Now, as an entrepreneur, I've never been really asked too much about NATO. NATO is not exactly when I'm doing deals or building buildings in Washington or New York or wherever I may be building them. But the question was asked about NATO. Knowing a little bit about NATO at the time, this was a couple of weeks ago, I said, in my opinion, NATO's obsolete. It's many decades old, like now 68 years, but it's many decades old. And NATO's too expensive because we can't afford this anymore. And people are being brought in for a free ride. It turned out I was right on every single subject. The problem is, and I had a very good interview with David Sanger of the New York Times, and I was covered very fairly by the New York Times, which is unusual for them, if you want to know the truth. But I was covered by him very fairly. And people were surprised at the instinct that I had, because it turns out that we are spending too much money on NATO, and it turns out, very importantly, that it is obsolete. NATO's not talking about terrorism.